Why, hello everyone. We are back. Yeah, we were gone for a little bit, but we are back. We were
Mhm.
thinking about all sorts of things critically
And
uh,
deeply.
and deeply,
Yeah.
clearly and distinctly. And now we have formed an opinion, and we
Yeah.
are ready to share more things with you. So, we thought that today we would talk about Rene Descartes.
hmm Are we going to go? Okay, to me. So we're going to talk
Dot dot dot.
about So we're going to talk about Descartes today, specifically his writing Discourse on Method. So we're not going to talk about all of it because with rereading it, I forgot how much he covers in this
Yeah.
very short work. So we're just going to focus in on his arguments around experiential learning, about how you can't learn everything from books, although I will trouble that a bit. I'm an English major, so you can expect me to do that. And then I think we'll go into his 4 rules for rational thinking.
Yep.
That's for today. So, how about you introduce Descartes to us?
He was very nice. No, he Descartes, 1596, 1650. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the time, and Descartes did all sorts of peculiar things throughout life. He was, I think, mainly known for his philosophy. He is also responsible for, I think it's actually officially one of the most, if not the most, reproduced figure in neuroscience, which is the guy sitting with the fire and the reflex arc, which he wrote about. He was also a soldier at some point, which I find fascinating, and he had all kinds of peculiarities about his life. For example, he had convinced his teachers that he did his best work in bed, so he was the one who was allowed to sleep in and didn't have to show up in school because he was so intelligent and bright, and everybody thought that he should just be able to do that. A
Yeah.
final sort of fun fact I always think is that if you've ever, and you undoubtedly have, either used or seen a graph with an x and y axis, that was invented by Descartes, hence
Oh,
Cartesian
I didn't know
axis.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Oh
Oh,
no, the story is probably apocryphal, but it's fun anyway. He was, of course, being Descartes, lying in bed, and the
yeah.
story has it that he saw a fly in the corner of his room, like on the wall near the ceiling, and he
Yeah.
thought, if I am to describe to a stranger where exactly that fly is, what would I do? And then he looked at the corner and he thought, that's three axes, right? There is a y-axis and an x-axis and a z-axis coming toward you. And if I put numbers on them, I can say, well, that fly is on 351, and then the person knows exactly where the fly is. Whether that's true, I don't know. It could be complete nonsense, but I do think it's se non è vero è ben trovato. So it's a
You
good
just
one. That's
you just said it, so it's most likely 100% true.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
when it comes from me, then it's you. But that's it. I
Yeah.
think it's a fun story regardless. So there was that, and then near the end of his life, he went to Sweden, which is Anna's neck of the woods, and there he was killed. Now you can tell that part.
And also, so there's a moral to this story that viewers, you should not be impressed that he convinced his teachers to let him stay in bed and sleep in, because really that's what ended up killing him.
True.
So he was brought over to Stockholm, Sweden by Queen Christina, who I have to say, I'm just obsessed with her. She's a very interesting figure. She became a monarch at 3 years old, and was not very interested in being a monarch. She was more interested in the sciences and the arts and pursuing knowledge. So she did a lot for her country in expanding those areas. But she read some of Descartes' work, found it very interesting. So she convinced him to come to Sweden to specifically teach her or to talk to her about his ideas on love. So it took some convincing, and she said, I will establish some kind of like scientific academy and you will head it. So he was like, okay. So she brought him over on a boat, along with 2,000 books, which is the ultimate Amazon order, to like order Descartes and 2,000 books that you're going to read. So Descartes came over. um, it didn't go very well because Queen Christina was a busy woman, and she did not want to wait for Descartes to teach in the mid-afternoon. So she wanted to have the lessons or the discourse at 5, 6 a.m. in the morning. So he had to get up that early. It was also very cold. It turns out they didn't really get along, so I think they only met 5 or 6 times before communication broke down. Um, then he ended up catching, was it pneumonia? Is that what?
Pneumonia, yes.
Yeah. Which historians think was from him having to get up so early and sit in these cold rooms, and he died in Sweden. So my countrywoman Queen Christina might be the reason for Descartes' death, but maybe if he was a little bit more hardy, he would have survived it.
Maybe, maybe. So here you see the tragedy of Descartes. But
Tragedy. I think it's a lesson.
yeah,
Get up. The early bird gets the worm and will survive Stockholm in the winter.
and stay in school
And
because it's the
stay in
best.
school. Also, just another tidbit about Christina. She actually abdicated the throne secretly. She dressed up as a man and ran away because she felt like her queen roles was getting in the way of her exploration and learning. But when she left, she took most of her books and art, so she like depleted the castle
Nice.
of all of her stuff, which I liked quite a lot. Okay, we're returning
Amazing.
to
Yeah,
Descartes.
it's
We're
awesome.
returning to Descartes. Okay, so we wanted to start with, I guess, experiential learning. So he opens Discourse talking about basically his schooling, right? Of how his education started, and it started what we're familiar with, right? Of going to the typical school, reading books, having, your masters explain these books to you. But he came to the conclusion that this kind of learning was actually very limited because he was only given a very small or narrow perspective on life, and also given the perspective of whatever was going on around him was what was natural and normal. So he was French, so then the conclusion that whatever was going on in France, that is the natural order of the world, and if anyone else is doing anything different, they're just backwards. So he found that his education also taught him that. Anything you want to add with the book learning?
No, I think that's a good summary. Yes.
So once he was old enough to, did he technically quit school? He made it sound like he quit school. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't recall that detail, but or he finished it and decided that he had to do something else too. But yeah,
Yeah. So once he was either quit or once he was old enough, basically once he was old enough to travel, he came to this conclusion that he had learned all he could from books. So he needed to go out into the world, and specifically he needed to leave his country to be able to deepen his learning. So I wrote it down. What did he call it? So instead of looking at school books, he was going to explore the book of the world. So that was going to be his new education. I don't know. Do you want to describe what that looks like then? How did he do that?
well, he traveled a lot and saw a lot of different places. And as I said, that is in itself fascinating. That he even worked
Yeah.
as a soldier. He has lived in the Netherlands for a bit. He's lived in other places, so he definitely got around and
Yeah.
experienced a lot of things. I think that is not something that can be argued. I
Yeah.
think it's more so the concept of how well does that work?
Yes. Well, and why do you remember the arguments, or how do you understand his argument about why this education is better than books? Why is it more important to travel and read the book of the world rather than stay in your own country and read?
I think it's. I think you were right in the description of if you stay in one place, if you learn in school, you may get a fairly narrow and sort of dogmatic view of something.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you go out and explore for yourself, you will see things from a different perspective and be exposed to different perspectives and different viewpoints.
Yeah. Which then the consequence of that, Descartes found, was you no longer take for granted your own beliefs as being true. And then you have to actually interrogate what you believe, and take this new information that you've learned from these other nations to then find out what the truth actually is. So you're not just taking it as gospel because this is the way we do it in Alberta. So this must be the right way for it to happen. I lost my train of thought for a second. He was very specific, though, about leaving your nation. And again, this is a different time, a different country. I don't know if France was as culturally varied as, say, Canada, because we're quite varied from province to province. That, if I was to go to Quebec, it would feel very much like being in a different nation, or even if I was on the East Coast, it would feel very much like being in a different nation. But he wasn't just talking about touring your own country. You had to specifically leave your nation and go into foreign nations to have this type of experiential learning. And this ties into skepticism, right?
Yep.
Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think he says it's. I think he says that testing ideas and the skepticism is a good thing, but that he also kind of disagrees with those who doubt everything for the sake of doubting everything. And I think that
Yes.
that is one of the issues with academic skepticism, that it's good to be critical and think about a lot of things and ask yourself if you agree with something and be skeptical about things. But that can also turn into, well, I believe nothing. I don't think anything is true. Everything is wrong. Everything that's too much. And then you are doubting for the sake of doubting, as opposed to, I think, doing critical thinking.
Doing the critical thinking, but then tying it specifically to the experiential learning of, if you read in some kind of textbook that this is what the Taj Mahal looks like, no, you need to go to India, see the Taj Mahal, and then you will know the truth. That for him, it was that, right? That you cannot believe what is told to you. You need to go out and experience those things firsthand to know if they are true. Again, this is a different time. The types of books and textbooks that he was reading was a lot different than the types of books and textbooks that we have today, but I think you would be able to get a very accurate account of other places from books. I actually haven't asked you if you have the same issues as me. Do you have any issues with experiential learning, or this idea of travel specifically as being the best way to learn?
I think that travel to learn is something that can really enrich your understanding of specific things. I mean, I live in a completely different country. In fact, I live on a different continent than where I was born, and that has definitely taught me a lot. However, having said that, I also think that before you can do that in any sensible way, I'm not talking about me in this case, but I'm talking about more what he's saying, I think.
Yeah.
Before you can do that, before you can benefit from such things, there needs to be a certain level of knowledge for you to actually be able to make sense of what is going on. And I think there are certain things that would make me nervous. For example, if my cardiologist would say, I learned through experiential learning. I mean, yeah, the first 50 patients didn't make it, but the last 20 are kind of okay now. Because I didn't really read the textbook. I just went to travel and looked at what others were doing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I would feel really comforted by that knowledge. So I think there are certain things, certain ways, being exposed to other cultures, being exposed to how things are done in another country or different part of the world. I think they can be tremendously helpful. But I also think that before you're able to do that, you need to have a certain level of basic knowledge, because otherwise that's not going to do much for you.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. One of my issues with this, I also agree that travel can be a wonderful way to experience other cultures firsthand. Yes, I think you need some of that prior learning going into it. But I think a lot of people, like Descartes, but he's in a different time. But even today, when I talk to people that are very well traveled and they just say to other people, you need to do the same, is they do not acknowledge the privilege of travel and how the vast majority of the world does not have the means for this kind of education. So that's what I take
Yeah.
not offense with, but that's where I kind of go back of, well, then this is a very elite type of education. And again, because we are in a different time period, and I do think we have different resources than Descartes had, but I think there is the opportunity to experience other cultures from where you are if you do not have those means. Because otherwise, what you're saying is, well, then you can't deepen your critical thinking because you can't travel. So sorry for you.
Yes.
That's then you're limited. That's it. So I think that's one of my main issues with this. I do see the value of it, but I think we do also need to see that not everyone has this privilege. So then not to undervalue people that may have learned these things in different ways.
Yeah.
So.
It's interesting because I'm thinking about how you would express that, because like in a mathematical sense you have the like a necessary but not sufficient condition, but this is
Yeah.
not exactly that. I think it's more the opposite. Like it is a benefit, but it is not necessary. It just
Yes.
adds something. I don't know what the equivalent of that
Yeah.
is in math
Well,
language, but
yes. And a lot of it depends on where you are in the world. Like, obviously, for you growing up in the Netherlands, it was a lot easier for you to go into different countries.
yeah,
Where
absolutely.
for me being in Canada, it's difficult to even see your entire nation. I still
Yeah.
haven't been to all the places in Canada. Um, and yeah, as a child, because my parents were not by any means wealthy, that the only other country I'd been to was the States because we border right up
Yeah.
to it, right? Yeah, so there's different contexts, there's different. So I would say, yes, this active learning can be very beneficial, but also take it with a grain of salt that this is a very privileged learning, that I don't think we should just put books and other types of learning to the side.
No, and I also no, I agree. And I also wonder if you can learn everything through experiential learning. I don't know if some things can be learned if you cannot experience them. Like it's very hard to make someone experience how brain cells communicate, for example. And whether you go to the United States or Japan or Europe or whatever, it doesn't really
Yeah,
matter. It's not
yeah,
something you can really experience. So there are topics, I think, that you can experience much more easily. Again, seeing how people do things in different cultures and countries, sure,
yeah,
but certain more technical aspects of your learning, I don't think you can necessarily experience. You have to
yeah,
learn basic knowledge from a book or from a qualified instructor or from whatever, but not, you
yeah.
cannot learn that by traveling to England and then coming back and then you know that thing. I don't think that's how it works.
No, and that's fun because it just makes me think of like Rousseau's Emile. Have you read Emile?
No,
Because
I have not.
he is that is experiential learning on steroids, that he because he works through this whole theoretical, that he has this theoretical student Emile, um, and it's just all through questioning. So if he's asking how does that plant grow, as an instructor you just ask more questions, and like at one point I'm like, just explain to the poor kid how that
Yes,
plant is growing, because yeah,
yes,
they're not gonna, how do they actually come to the technical terms if it's all just questioning, 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 or experience, experience,
yes,
experience.
yeah. No,
So
I agree.
it's useful, but it's not everything. How are we doing for time? Do we have time to go over the?
I think we have time. We've done 19 minutes.
Oh, okay,
I
good.
think we have, yeah, yeah, go ahead.
So his four rules then. I got distracted by my camera there. You can't see
Oh,
it.
yeah, yeah. Oh,
Four
your
rules.
fingers were gone?
They
Oh,
were
yeah.
gone. So the four rules, um, which ties into his experiential learning, that this is what he was explaining. These were the rules that he then guided himself in his travel. But I think you would agree, these rules are very useful for any kind of critical thinking or any kind of
Yeah.
investigation. Doesn't just have to be travel. So the first one is, and this is very much skepticism at its core, right? Never accept anything for truths which I did not clearly know to be so. Do you want to interpret that? What does that mean, Dr. Brown?
Well, I struggle with that one because I feel that that is something that could lead you astray really, really easily.
Yeah.
Because if you have to depend on something being, in his words, a clear and distinct image in your mind, and the clearer it is, the more distinct it is, the more likely it is to be true, well, good luck.
Yeah.
Because some things sound or appear to be very true and very logically true in the natural world, but turn out to not be true at all, including a lot of his theories about, for example, again, cognitive neuroscience, which turned out to not be true at all. And he did what he
Yeah.
had, and he did but I understand that. But just the fact that something sounds or feels really clear and logical to you
Yeah.
really
Or
doesn't make it
visually,
true.
yes, or it's something that you can see, right? That it's something tangible, right? But not
Yes.
everything can be understood through those senses.
Yes.
But I think for some concepts, I think this is a good way to go, right? That I'm not going to accept something um, to be true unless I have some kind of evidence.
That I think is very good reasoning. Yeah.
Yeah, and some kind of like experiential evidence, whether that is from a reputable source or your own personal experience. I'm not going to accept it to be true, right? So I think you can also read it as I'm not just going to take someone else's word for it because they're saying it to me. I myself need to work through it and understand it to be true.
And that I think is
So
very sensible,
yeah.
right? That is very sensible.
So then his three rules. I need to stop going over here. The three rules following that is him laying out some of the steps of how he then unpacks whether something is true or not, or at least that's how I understand it. So the second rule that he has is to divide each of the difficulties that you are coming across, divide them into smaller segments to then examine them. So that's the second rule. So to divide. Do you have an example of that? Because in my social sciences, I have a really hard time thinking of an
Well,
example of what
I
that would
think
be.
I think if you look at his whole look at his dualism. So he said there's a material body, there's an immaterial soul. Only humans have a soul, animals do not, because humans can do things that we know are done by the soul, like talk and have emotions and this kind of stuff, and animals don't have that because we know that this is the case because religion tells us so. In a nutshell, I'm like this, like we know
Yeah, yeah,
that this is that
yeah,
is part of your soul. Immaterial soul allows you to do those higher order cognitive things.
yeah,
Where is the soul? Well, I don't know. I may have to look at someone's brain. He had an interesting idea that your brain is important for and if there is any seed of the soul, it's probably in there somewhere. But where? I don't know. Let's look at a brain. He cuts open a brain and he
yeah,
says, well, there's two halves. That's interesting. This part is on that side and it's on that side. This part is on that side and it's on that side. But here is one part. There's only one of these. That was the pineal gland.
yeah,
And he says, well, that must be it. That is where the soul and the immaterial soul and the material body then interact, right?
yeah,
And I think that is a matter of you break something. This is probably not the best example, but you break
yeah,
something down into smaller and smaller concepts. Well, it must be in the brain. If it's in the brain, where is it? I don't know. Let's cut
yeah,
open the brain. What do I see? There's two of these. One. So every time, and there are, again, I'm sure there are much better examples of that, but you can break down a problem in many ways, set sub goals, try to solve each sub goal, and every time you
yeah.
solve a sub goal, you get closer to solving the actual problem.
Good. So that then ties into rule number 3. You basically just demonstrated rule number 3, which
Boom.
is to start with the most simple. So the most simple, I guess, in that example you just gave is, okay, well, how are man and beast different from one another, and what are the characteristics that show we have a soul base or versus animals? So start with the most simple of these difficulties and then move up step by step to the more complex, which I think is what
Yes.
you demonstrated, right? So we've gone from what's the difference between humans and animals, to then where in the brain, what is that specific thing in the brain, to that, right? So start with the most simple, and then I've been in too much teacher training, scaffold to
Yes.
the
Nice.
most difficult. Number 4, and this is Stephen and I will know this very well from grad school. You then make a detailed account of all of these steps to ensure that nothing has been missed or left out. This means you take lots of notes, you record everything, you keep everything that you've consulted or looked at. So then you can have a record of what you've done and then keep track of what you've done, because otherwise we will forget those or miss things that maybe we forget about later down the road. Anything you want to add to that? To those 3 steps?
No, I think that's it, and I think that's also what you typically do in science when you write something. You take people through all the steps that you have taken, and I think that is something that you see in many beginning scientists, for example, in student work. That is something you have to learn to really take a reader by the hand.
Yeah.
Guide them through every step you have taken, because if there is one step missing, the reader may not be able to follow what was completely clear and logical to you, how you arrived at a certain conclusion.
Yeah. Well, it's the same with any like social science paper as well, right? You are showing, you can't just give your argument, you can't just give your conclusion. The majority of the paper then is showing how you have gotten to that conclusion. What is the evidence that you came across to get to that conclusion? And usually it is this dividing, right? And you're building upon it. So I think that part, yeah, I'm like you, that I'm a little bit skeptical of the number 1, never accept anything unless you know you have proof that it's true. But I think the 3 other steps are quite useful.
I think the other 3 steps, yes, they are. I think I was reminded when I was rereading this of a quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I found this actually one of the most sensible things I think he's ever said. He said that one of the challenges of life is knowing enough to think you're right, but not knowing enough to know you're wrong.
Yes.
And I think that is where this first step can break down. To you, something can be completely clear, and you may be convinced that you are absolutely right. But the reality is, you may simply lack the knowledge to understand that you are wrong.
Yeah.
And then you get to a sort of level of metacognition, of knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know. Especially when you start out with something, you just may not see how wrong you are. And for example, in the United States, I don't know if it's the same thing here, but probably is, patent offices have stopped accepting ideas for like perpetual motion machines, because people keep coming up with things that perpetual, but the reality is it's not possible. So you cannot actually create that, but people think they have now invented it, even though people have been trying to do this for centuries. It's just not possible. It's not possible to make such a thing that creates motion, but it's not possible. So those offices have had to say, we can't do this anymore, right? We won't accept it. We won't even look at it. But people lacking the actual knowledge to see that they are wrong, in their mind it's completely clear, will then continue to do those things. And I think that's my biggest issue with it. If you don't have enough knowledge to see that you are wrong, then you can't really make progress, because you cannot judge that you are wrong, and you may think you were right, and that becomes a very dangerous area.
Well, I think I've said this several times in this series, and I say it to my students all the time, of a lot of education and just critical thinking is, we don't know what we don't know. So this education, I think, is again, with my decade plus of post-secondary, I didn't come out of it feeling really confident that I knew anything. If anything, it just opened up Pandora's box of how much there is to know and how little I do know, right? That I think that's a better place to be than just assuming truth, and that you know the truth. Yeah.
Yes.
But the truth is out there.
Nice.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. That was a beautiful final statement. Yeah.
So I think that's it. That's Descartes. You can measure for yourself whether Queen Christina or Descartes is the hero of this story. Also, whoever can tell me what my background is, I was going to offer up a free dinner date with Stephen, but he didn't like that. So I don't know what prize to give you. Maybe
I think it's going to be whoever guesses that gets a free online dinner date with Anna.
I don't like doing like dating apps, so maybe this is the way to do it.
Yeah, this is it. That's a big audience, so we're gonna. There will be someone. That will be someone. There
You
may be
have to tell
multiple
me.
people.
Well, not only
Yeah.
this, okay, so this, you can not only do you have to say what show this is from, what is the name of the ship that this bridge is on?
If you can answer this, a romantic date is in your future. Now, as you are commenting on that, also comment on what you would like us to cover next, because we have an idea what
Probably
we're going
more
to do next.
important. I have no idea what we're doing next.
Okay, then we need to think about that. We shall do this. Suggestions are welcome.
Suggestions are welcome.
We
Yeah.
hope this was useful and interesting. Once again, with half an hour. The timing is uncanny. So, we will very gladly see you later. Bye.